Welcome to the March 2017 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, would you please introduce our agenda for this morning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 6 items for your consideration and 1 presentation. First, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking and notice of inquiry that would enable voice service providers to better protect subscribers from illegal and fraudulent robocalls. Second, you will consider a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that would adopt rules to facilitate the deployment of technologies used to combat contraband wireless devices in correctional facilities while seeking comment on additional proposals and solutions. Third, you will consider a report and order, notice of inquiry, further notice of proposed rulemaking and order that would enhance service quality and propose a new provider compensation plan for video relay services. Fourth, you will consider a second report and order, and second further notice of proposed rulemaking that would facilitate mobile broadband deployment, including LTE, promote greater spectrum efficiency, and reduce regulatory burdens and costs. Fifth, you will consider a notice of proposed rulemaking that proposes to eliminate the traffic and revenue reports and to streamline the circuit capacity reports. Sixth, you will consider a report and order that would authorize channel sharing outside the context of the incentive auction and thus permit stations with auction-related channel sharing agreements to continue to operate if their auction-related agreements expire or otherwise terminate. Finally, you will hear a presentation from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau updating you on the status of its continuing inquiry into the AT&T Mobility 911 outage that occurred on March 8, 2017. This is your agenda for today. Please note the consent agenda as listed in the Commission's March 2017 Sunshine Notice has been deleted from the agenda, and those items were adopted by the Commission. The first item, entitled "In Advanced Methods to Target and Eliminate Unlawful Robocalls," will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and Allison Cutler, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Chief Cutler, when you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, I am pleased to introduce an item that begins the important process of making it easier for service providers to block the illegal robocalls that plague American consumers. Efforts to find and stop illegal robocallers are hampered by practices such as caller ID spoofing, which allows a caller to make the call seem like it's coming from a phone number other than the actual one. And many of the worst offenders are located in other countries, posing challenges for effective enforcement. This is a real problem, and it demands a real solution. Today's item builds on the efforts of the industry-led Robocall Strike Force and our own clarification that the law allows the blocking of spoof calls when the actual subscriber of the spoofed number makes a do not originate request. The notice of proposed rulemaking and notice of inquiry before you furthers the partnership between the Commission and the industry to protect consumers from illegal robocalls. It proposes to remove certain regulatory uncertainties that the industry has identified as limiting its ability to block robocalls that are almost certainly illegal. It also begins an inquiry into other things the Commission can do to help the industry protect consumers against these calls by asking about provider-initiated blocking. Before turning the presentation over to CGB's staff, I would like to thank the other bureaus and offices that provided input and collaboration on this item. The Office of General Counsel, the Office of Strategic Planning, the Wireline Competition Bureau, and the Enforcement Bureau. With me at the table are Kurt Schroeder, Chief of CGB's Consumer Policy Division, John Adams, Deputy Chief of the Division, and Jerusha Barnett, Attorney Advisor in the Division, who will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Notice of Proposed Rulemaking and Notice of Inquiry before you begins a proceeding to facilitate voice service providers' blocking of illegal robocalls. Specifically, the item proposes rules that would remove the regulatory uncertainty so that voice service providers can block certain illegal robocallers without fear of violating the Commission's call completion rules and policies. Further, the proposed action asks about additional steps the Commission can take to help providers prevent such calls from reaching their consumers. The item responds to a request from the industry-led robocall strike force that the Commission take action to make it easier for the industry to block illegal robocalls. First, the item proposes to codify that providers may block spoofed calls when the actual subscriber to the spoofed number makes a do not originate request. This rule would codify in the Commission's rules a clarification issued by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau in 2016. Second, the item proposes changes to the Commission's rules to make clear that providers do not violate the Commission's call completion rules and policies by blocking calls originating from certain types of numbers. Specifically, the item proposes to expressly permit providers to block calls purporting to originate from numbers that are invalid. This includes, but is not limited to, numbers with an unassigned area code or numbers that use an N11 code, such as 911 or 411, in place of an area code. Identifying and blocking calls using these numbers may be easy for providers who have significant knowledge of the North American numbering plan. Next, the item proposes rules to expressly permit providers to block calls purporting to originate from numbers that have not been allocated by the North American Numbering Plan Administrator or the National Number Pool Administrator to any provider. Finally, it proposes rules to expressly permit providers to block calls purporting to originate from a number that has been allocated to a provider but is not currently assigned to a subscriber. The proposed action also seeks comment on how to treat calls that originate internationally. The rules proposed in this item will limit the ability of illegal callers to harass and even defraud consumers by allowing providers to stop some of these calls before they reach the consumer. But illegal callers are adaptable, and more sophisticated methods of identifying legal robocalls may be needed going forward. In recognition of this, the proposed action includes a notice of inquiry that asks questions about the possibility of expressly permitting providers to block calls for which objective criteria indicate with a high degree of certainty that the call to be blocked is illegal. Specifically, the notice of inquiry seeks more information about objective criteria a provider might use to identify illegal robocalls and the accuracy of these methods. Finally, the notice of inquiry seeks comment on what protections could be established to ensure that legitimate calls, which might share some traits with illegal robocalls, aren't blocked. We recommend adoption of this item and request editorial privileges to make technical and conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smith, for that compelling presentation. We will now turn to comments from the bench, starting with my colleague, Commissioner Clyburn.
Mr. Chairman, the phone rings. You pick it up. You naturally say hello. Then you hear a seemingly benign question. Can you hear me? Instinctively, you answer in the affirmative since you actually heard the question. But with that yes, trouble potentially begins for you. According to reports, this is precisely how so many of our citizens have been scammed in recent months. Without their knowledge, intent, or actual consent, unsuspecting consumers are signed up for various products and services, such as a home alarm system or a cruise, because they answered yes to an unrelated question. According to the Better Business Bureau, 65% of reports received by their scam tracker during the last few days of January were related to this particular scam. And just who is behind this scam? Where are these calls originating? Why is a do not call list being honored? My mother asked me that question all the time. But answering these questions has proven harder than one may think, especially when robocalls appears to originate from an unassigned or invalid telephone number. Last August, at the Commission's urging, more than 30 companies came together to launch a robocall task force. 60 days later, record speed in the FCC term, the group delivered a series of recommendations aimed at putting a stop to illegal and unwanted robocalls. Among the report's many recommendations was for the Commission to provide guidance on regulatory rules to facilitate, identify, and stopping robocalls from reaching the consumers. Today's notice of proposed rulemaking and notice of inquiry are steps in a right direction. By proposing rules expressly allowing providers to automatically block calls originated from unassigned or invalid numbers, the NPRM targets calls that are most likely established to defraud and harm consumers. But the NOI goes a step further by asking questions about objective criteria for identifying calls where there is a sufficiently high degree of certainty that the call is illegal. Illegal robocalls are no longer just a dinner table annoyance. According to a study released in December by CPR Call Blocker, 13% of U.S. adults have been a victim to phone scams. Nearly half of those scams lost between $100 and $10,000. So these phone scams have real economic consequences for American households. This calls for a multi-pronged, high-powered approach that includes tough enforcement of our rules, a commitment by industry to implement better call blocking technologies, and technology that empowers consumers with the means to decide which calls should be blocked, particularly those calls that may be unwanted but not necessarily illegal. According to UMail Robocall Index, 2.2 billion robocalls were placed nationwide in February of this year alone. Similarly, during the second half of 2016, 43% of complaints filed with the FCC's Consumer Help Center were related to robocalls. I would like nothing more than to report, following the completion of this rulemaking, that illegal and unwanted robocalls have been curtailed by a sizable percentage. Given the increasing sophistication of robocall scammers, this I know is a tall order, but we should try, and try we will. When a sustained focus and deep commitment by government and industry, with that sustained focus and deep commitment by government and industry, I am optimistic that we have the ability to make a real dent in the problem, because none of us should have to think twice when we hear the words, "Can you hear me?" My thanks, as always, go to the Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau, including Mark Stone, Mika Caldwell, Kirk Schroeder, John Adams, Jerusha Bennett. Your continued focus on stopping illegal and unwanted robocalls has my appreciation, the appreciation of Emily Clyburn, and the arrest of the American people. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll next turn to Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this notice, which is focused on protecting consumers from illegal robocalls, a distinction the item before us makes clearer than the previous circulated version. Unlike the prior commission, whose misguided interpretations of the Telephone Consumer Protection Act of 1991 have exposed legitimate businesses to liability for trying to provide useful information that their customers expect to receive, this item seeks comment on ways to stop actual bad actors from making calls to scam and defraud consumers. We should pursue these illegal robocalls, many of which are done overseas, to the fullest extent of our authority, including curtailing their ability to engage in abusive calling practices. While we wait for the D.C. Circuit to render a decision on the 2015 TCPA omnibus order and beg they do the right thing, we can at least agree that there are certain types of calls that seem to be such clear violations of the statute that they could be blocked under the appropriate circumstances. In particular, it is hard to even imagine a lawful reason for a caller to appear to place calls from invalid numbers, numbers not allocated to any provider, and numbers not assigned to any subscribers. If a legitimate business has consent to contact a consumer, it is difficult to see why the business would resort to spoofing an unassigned number. The harder questions put forth in the NOI portion seek comment on other categories of illegal robocalls that could be identified using objective standards. The challenge here is finding the right criteria to capture illegal robocalls without also blocking lawful calls, if at all possible. I hope that we receive a robust record, which needs to include ways to define and protect legitimate callers. One idea I would not support, however, would be to require providers to submit their proposed practices to Commission staff for review. This suggestion was excised from the item at my request, and I would not agree to it in the future either. Finally, I was heartened to see a discussion of a safe harbor to protect providers that block calls in accordance with the rules adopted by the Commission. Notwithstanding the D.C. Circuit's decision, the Commission may need to create a safe harbor for legitimate callers who follow industry best practices to keep consumer information up to date, but occasionally reach numbers that have been reassigned. Reassigned numbers remain a huge problem and needs to be resolved without just sticking the burden to any legitimate company, especially the wireless carriers. In terms of the larger picture, I can only hope that we are presented with the opportunity to revisit the erroneous decisions of the prior Commission that have harmed upstanding businesses and innovation without actually protecting consumers from abusive calls. Until that happens, a significant portion of U.S. commerce remains at the mercy of bounty-hunting law firms seeking to extract payments from a statutory interpretation gone awry. I thank the Chairman for accommodating my proposed changes and the staff for their diligent work. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. A week and a half ago, I got an email from one Mr. Duncan Weddington in Winchester, Tennessee. And this is what he wrote. Will you please start an initiative to stop invasive nuisance robocalls? We have received 5 already today, and the day is not over. Please help. I'm 80 years old and would like to spend my remaining time on God's good earth without these consistent, unwanted calls. A few days after that, I got an email from one Miss Florence Friedman in New York City. She had first complained to the FCC 2 years ago, saying that the number of robocalls she was getting was maddening. Now, she put it in 2015, these calls come in from a wide range of phone numbers from a wide range of cities. I'm sure if I reported a specific number, you wouldn't find anyone at that number. This is the Wild West, an area of lawlessness. It is the FCC's job to find a solution. Please do it fast. And she forwarded that email to me last Friday, adding, as you can see, this is an old problem, one which persists and has gotten worse. Can't you do something? Hopefully you will put this high on your agenda. It really is disruptive to one's life. We deserve peace and quiet and, yes, even security. Please do something. There are millions of Americans who are as fed up by illegal robocalls as Duncan Weddington and Florence Friedman. I am one of them. Emily Clyburn would seem to be another. Robocalls are the number one consumer complaint to the FCC from members of the American public, and it's no wonder. Every month, U.S. consumers are bombarded with an estimated 2.4 billion robocalls. And not only are they intrusive or irritating, but as we've heard, they're also frequently employed to scam our most vulnerable populations, such as elderly Americans, out of their hard-earned dollars. This must change, and today we lay the foundation for changing it. In this notice of proposed rulemaking, we aim to take an important first step in ending the scourge of illegal robocalls. In particular, we propose to authorize providers to block calls purporting to originate from unassigned or invalid numbers. And these are numbers that are either unassigned under the North American numbering plan, not allocated to a phone company, or not assigned to a subscriber. In each case, there is no legitimate reason for anyone to spoof such a number. And so by allowing providers to block calls from unassigned numbers, we can help stop scammers. Next, we codified guidance provided in 2015 by the FCC's Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. The providers may block calls when the subscriber to a particular telephone number asks that calls purporting to originate from that number be blocked. By formalizing this safe harbor, we give certainty to voice service providers that will allow them to block plainly illegitimate calls, and we also empower subscribers of spoofed numbers to take action to protect themselves and their information. Finally, we seek input on other objective criteria to identify illegal robocalls, a criteria that could help distinguish between, for example, a woman at a domestic shelter who is legitimately using caller ID spoofing to check on her kids at home, as opposed to a foreign huckster pretending to call from the Internal Revenue Service. And that's because we know that the problem of illegal robocalls is complicated, and the solutions are many. And so today's proposals are only the Commission's first step toward defeating this scourge. I, too, would like to thank our staff, John B. Adams, Jerusha Burnett, Micah Caldwell, Allison Cutler, Kurt Schroeder, and Mark Stone from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, Henning Schulzrena and Antonio Sweet from the Office of Strategic Policy, Jeff G., Rick Heineman, and Christy Thompson from the Enforcement Bureau, Adam Copeland, Christine Fargetstein, Dan Kahn, and Nirali Patel from the Wireline Competition Bureau, and Billy Layton and Rick Mallon from the Office of General Counsel for their hard interdisciplinary work on this notice of proposed rulemaking and notice of inquiry, and for their continued dedication and service to the American public. Oh, and one last thing. Mr. Weddington, may your remaining time on God's good earth be ample and free from robocalls. And Ms. Friedman, I personally will not stop until you can finally enjoy some peace and quiet. With that, we will proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Yes.
The chair votes aye as well. The ayes have it, so ordered with editorial privileges granted as requested. Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. It is entitled Promoting Technological Solutions to Combat Contraband Wireless Device Use in Correctional Facilities, and Neisha Gendelsberger, Acting Chief of the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Ms. Gendelsberger, if you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Before we begin with the item, I would like to introduce a special guest. With us today is Captain Robert Johnson, a retired South Carolina corrections officer. Captain Johnson and his family were directly affected by an inmate's use of a contraband cell phone. Captain Johnson is here to share his story.
Thank you. I wish to thank the South Carolina Department of Corrections for this opportunity to speak before this commission. I also thank the FCC and its leadership in its attempt to stop criminals from having access to cell phones in prison and for allowing me to speak. I also thank you on behalf of the family of Kendrius Edwards, a 9-month-old baby that was killed on the orders of 2 locked-up criminals in 2 different states using cell phones. Who knows how many others have died and will die because locked-up criminals continue to have access to cell phones. As some of you will know, I was shot 6 times on those orders of a locked-up criminal gang leader who used a cell phone to set up an attempted murder and pay the hitman $6,000, all in retaliation for doing my job. Let me give you a brief history of what happened to me on March the 5th, 2010, one day before my birthday. Using techniques I was taught in the Air Force and converting those principles to the prison environment, my team had intercepted a contraband package worth $50,000 to a group of criminals. This package was one over 100 my team was able to intercept during the years I was over the contraband section. On orders of a locked-up gang member, angry over my interference with his criminal activity, a former inmate gang member came to my house at 5:30 in the morning, kicked my door open. I was in the back bathroom getting ready to go to work. When I heard the door kicked open, I knew this was a hit and not the police. I called out to the intruder, and he took the bait and bypassed my bedroom where my wife was still sleeping. I met the intruder in the hallway and recognized him as a former inmate from the prison where I worked as captain over contraband. We fought in the hallway, but he was able to push me away. The last thing I remember was him raising a pistol toward me. I yelled as loud as I could, "You're going to shoot me? You're going to shoot me." This was to try and warn my wife to get out of the house, which she did. After being shot 6 times in the stomach and chest area with a .38 revolver from less than 6 feet away, I woke up sitting on the floor of my back bathroom. My wife, the bravest woman I know, came back in the house, called 911, brought me a towel to try and stop the bleeding, and we began to quote scriptures. My favorite one was Psalms 118 and 17, "I shall live and not die." I was flown to the trauma center in Columbia, South Carolina. My doctor told me I died twice there, but refused to stay dead. He told me I bled out 3 times, and they gave me 63 units of blood. The doctor said my liver was shattered. They had to use surgical tape to hold it together. One of the assisting doctors had to manually pump my heart to keep blood and oxygen flowing to my brain. My doctor knew that I would have brain damage because of that decrease in flow of blood and oxygen. My wife was brought into the operating room to allow her to say goodbye and to touch a warm body. But she rejected that plan, and instead she grabbed my head and prayed to the Most High God to let me live, which was answered with a yes from him, as you can see. My doctor said I should be dead, and as a miracle, I'm still alive. I spent over 5 months in 6 different hospitals. Last Wednesday, I had surgery number 24, but who's counting, with more to come. But the Most High Father has not given me the spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind. Those 6 bullets hitting my body at 755 feet per second resulted in severe scarring to my right lung, which caused me to breathe as if I have both COPD and asthma. My right lung, diaphragm, and liver healed into one mass. I am in pain 24/7. My right foot feels as if it's on fire all day long, which gets worse as the day progressed. My front abdominal muscles were destroyed, and I have 2 pigskin meshes in front to replace it. I refuse to take pain pills. I just live with the pain. This was an attempted murder on my life on the orders of a locked-up gang member using cell phones. This sounds like something from South America. This technology may have been able to stop this from happening, and it was available. The South Carolina Department of Corrections conducted a test before I was shot to show that jamming techniques would work. But the cell phone industry and its friends have done everything possible to hinder and muddy the waters in order to gain time and hope everyone will forget and move on to other things. Jamming hasn't happened because of the 1934 law, which was enacted before cell phones were even created. It would take the entire Congress to change this outdated law. The cell phone industry doesn't want this to happen. Why? Is it money? Is it fear of losing control of their product? Only they know the reasons. I personally believe it has something to do with money. Why do they fight something that will ensure locked-up criminals are not able to use cell phones to communicate with their criminal accomplices and continue controlling criminal enterprises from within the prison walls? There are other technologies that will stop cell phones from leaving the confines of a prison. Encryption technology is possible because it moves Congress out of the picture. But the cell phone industry does not want any technology to advance. Instead, they push managed access, which costs too much, and some inmates have already learned how to defeat. We cannot stop and allow this to go forth. Not to go forth. Something must happen. The beacon-based technology, which shuts down the entire phone system, no phone, no text, no video, seems to be a workable technology. But I would be surprised if the cell phone industry would try to allow something to come up, and they did not throw in 101 obstacles in the way of this technology. This is America. We have the greatest minds in the world. I know they have the answer if only allowed to proceed. How many more innocent people have to die or get hurt before the cell phone industry decides to become a good corporate citizen? There's no valid reason for a locked-up criminal to have access to a cell phone. None. Not to call 911, not to call home. Absolutely none. This problem must be resolved for once and for all. Once again, I thank the FCC for all you're trying to do to overcome this 600-pound gorilla in the room. And to all the DOCs in America, I say think outside the box, but always within policy, and stay true to your values. Thank you for your time, sir.
Well, thank you, Captain Johnson. If ever there was someone who had walked through the valley of the shadow of death, it's you, and I'm glad you're here today to share your story.
Thank you.
Chief Gundelsberger, we'll turn to you.
Thank you for Captain Johnson for your service and for being here today.
Thank you.
Your story is one of the reasons I'm happy to introduce a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that will help law enforcement to detect and disable the use of contraband wireless devices in correctional facilities. In recent years, the use of contraband wireless devices by inmates has grown rapidly. with inmates using these devices to commit criminal acts from behind bars. As an immediate step, this item would change the Commission's rules to expedite deployment of technologies called contraband interdiction systems inside correctional facilities to detect the use of contraband wireless devices. For the longer term, the item seeks further comment on additional solutions that the Commission could put in place in the future. I am joined at the table by Suzanne Tetro, Roger Noel, Lloyd Coward, Melissa Conway, and Anna Gentry. In addition to Wireless Bureau team at the table, I would like to thank Tom Derinch and Muslim Savez for their hard work on this item, as well as staff in Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, Office of Engineering and Technology, and Office of General Counsel for providing their valuable expertise. Melissa will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. We present to you today a report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking that take important steps to help law enforcement tackle the serious public safety threats posed by inmate use of contraband wireless devices in correctional facilities. Various states have deployed contraband interdiction systems, or CISs, that detect and block the use of contraband wireless devices in correctional facilities and require FCC authorization. The item before you today would make it easier to deploy CISs by streamlining the authorization process and promoting stakeholder cooperation, while also seeking comment on additional potential solutions for combating this problem. The report and order would expedite FCC approval of special temporary authority requests and spectrum leasing arrangements between wireless providers and CIS operators by providing for overnight application processing and eliminating the current requirement to file an application to change regulatory status. The report and order would also require a CIS operator to route 911 calls from a correctional facility to the local public safety answering point, while affording the PSAP discretion to request blocking of harassing calls. In addition to streamlining FCC processes, the report and order would ensure wireless provider cooperation and coordination with CIS operators seeking to deploy systems by requiring good faith negotiations. Further, the report and order would require certain CIS operators to notify the community in which the correctional facility is located prior to CIS deployment. The report and order also calls for the designation of an FCC ombudsperson to serve as the single point of contact for stakeholders on contraband wireless device-related issues. Today's further notice explores additional steps toward eliminating this public safety threat by seeking comment on whether we should require that wireless providers disable contraband wireless devices in correctional facilities that are detected by an eligible CIS after receiving a qualifying request. The further notice seeks detailed comment on the disabling process, including what eligibility demonstrations a CIS operator must make, what a qualifying request should include, and who should transmit the request, the process a wireless provider must follow to disable a contraband device, and how best to minimize and correct disabling of non-contraband wireless devices. In addition, the further notice seeks comment on whether wireless providers should be required to notify CIS operators of network changes that could impact the effectiveness of the CIS. The further notice also seeks comment on the feasibility of other potential solutions to the contraband wireless device problem, including whether wireless providers could identify and disable contraband wireless devices in correctional facilities using their own network elements and resources, or whether other technical solutions, such as beacon-based technologies, are viable. The Wireless Telecommunications Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges to make technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Conway. We will now turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. I would like to begin this morning by thanking Captain Johnson for your bravery, for your advocacy, and for your willingness to share such a powerful story. You may know that I have family not far from yours, and so I appreciate you taking the time. I know you expressed how much pain you're in, and my heart is with you and your family. Your faith and resilience, it just has buoyed me this morning, and I want to express to you how much your presence means today. My deepest appreciation, I've said it 10 times already, goes to you, as well as to your brothers and sisters in law enforcement, particularly to those who are too often underpaid, I know my home state, overburdened, and underappreciated, those fellow correctional officers who put their lives on the line each and every day. My heart and my support goes out to all of you. This past October, Captain Johnson, I took part in something we created called the Connecting Communities Tour. And then I visited Essex County up in New Jersey with Congressman Daniel Payne Jr. We met with correctional officers, inmates, and their families, and toured the facility with their deputy director. We spoke at length about the cost of inmate calling services, the challenges faced by families struggling to keep in touch with their incarcerated loved ones, and the positive dividends connectivity brings when it comes to inmate behavior and attitude, and the broader societal costs of mass incarcerations. Here are a few figures I would like for all of us to consider. 50% of those incarcerated were the primary breadwinner for their families. 65% of the families with an incarcerated member were unable to meet their family's basic needs, and 70% of these families were caring for children under the age of 18. 49% of families struggled to provide basic food for their family. 48% had trouble meeting basic housing needs because of the financial cost of having an incarcerated loved one, and the high cost of maintaining contact with incarcerated family members led to more than 1 in 3 families into debt to pay for phone calls and visits alone. So when faced with a potential, Captain Johnson, that has the potential to increase inmate calling costs, I am naturally concerned. Now, I absolutely recognize and support the correctional facility's desire, as well as their duty, to combat the contraband cell phone problem, in part by installing contraband interdiction systems. Contraband wireless devices are illegal and are a safety threat, both to those behind and outside of prison walls. I wholeheartedly support this commission doing whatever it can to help law enforcement combat the serious threat these devices in the wrong hands enable. The cost for implementing these systems, however, should be appropriately assigned, and the economic burdens should not fall squarely on those families who are not at fault here. To that end, I asked the chairman to require CIS providers to certify, as part of the application process, that the cost for the service would not be passed through to consumers of inmate calling services. My request was rejected, and for that reason alone, Captain Johnson, I must concur in part, strictly on that part. I also asked the chairman to make reference to, in the order, the record evidence about the potential impact deployment of CISs may have on the rates inmates and their families pay to keep in touch. While I am disappointed that the chairman did not acknowledge the first request, I appreciate that he and Commissioner O'Reilly agreed to the latter. I am grateful that my colleagues also agreed to my request that the Commission institute some form of notice to consumers who reside near correctional facilities that choose to deploy CIS. In particular, the newly established ombudsperson will be charged with maintaining a database of all deployed CISs in the country and CIS providers will be required to notify the local community of such deployment 10 days before the activation of a new service. Now, I am passionate about this because it's personal for me. This notice, I know, will be much appreciated and beneficial to the surrounding community because the park in which I worked out frequently when I lived full-time in Columbia, South Carolina, is about 1,060 yards from a state level 1B correctional facility. We are a part of the community. We are a part of the correctional community. We support the correctional community. And what we are enabling today, Captain Johnson, for you and your former colleagues, is the ability from a regulatory standpoint for all of the options and solutions that we have at our disposal to be enabled. You've got my vote. You've got my commitment. I want to thank you once again for your selfless commitment to combating contraband wireless devices. And many thanks, of course, are due to the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau for your hard work on this item. We will combat, we will do everything we can to ensure that those who should not have wireless devices in correctional facilities will not have them. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can all agree that cell phones in the hands of prisoners can result in criminal and dangerous activities. I commend the correctional industry and the wireless industry for working with the Commission on this complex and challenging issue. There are many stakeholders with varied interests that need to be balanced, and this has proven to be a difficult task. I am generally supportive and will approve our efforts to facilitate the process for implementing contraband interdiction systems, or CISs. Streamlining and expediting the necessary Commission approvals for such systems makes sense. Correctional facilities should get quick action on their requests if they decide to implement a CIS. I will admit, however, that I'm not clear as to how these processes will be used. It seems like the systems are expensive and that there are alternatives such as metal detectors that are cheaper and potentially more effective at detecting all contraband, including cell phones. Regardless, these systems may be viable options for some correctional facilities, and it remains their choice as to whether to pay the requisite costs and install these systems. I do have reservations about one provision in the item, the requirement that licensees negotiate in good faith with CIS providers, and that if they fail to come to a timely agreement, the CIS provider can file for special temporary authority. Commission staff then has the right to grant the STA, despite not having licensee consent, if they find there was a lack of good faith. Since the order notes that wireless providers have been collaborating with entities seeking authorizations for CIS deployments, I'm not sure this requirement is really necessary. But my biggest concern is the precedent that we are setting without clear statutory authority and how this language could be implemented going forward. While I have no concerns about the intentions of the people in this room, we have seen in the past how well-intentioned language and policies can be reinterpreted and expanded over time. Hopefully, we'll not see any unintended consequences arise from a provision the Commission, a commission or two down the road. I appreciate the edits were accepted, however, to provide licensees more time to respond if a CIS provider files an STA alleging that a licensee was not negotiating in good faith. Additionally, edits were adopted to clarify who was responsible for implementing a request from a PSAP that it does not wish to receive calls from a certain correctional facility, and to seek further comment on how and whether licensees should provide CIS providers with advance notification if they implement spectrum or technology changes. And while I support the further notice where we seek comment on additional ideas that were raised in the record, I have concerns about some of the concepts that may not be able to support them if they were contained in a final order. These include the liability issues that wireless providers may face to disable phones that have been identified as being within the prison, the burdens of creating quiet zones in and around correctional facilities, and the possibility the Commission would mandate beacon technologies, which is not a technology-neutral approach. Regardless of these concerns, as always, I will keep an open mind and work with my colleagues, Commission staff, and all interested parties on this issue going forward. Lastly, I do want to make one position crystal clear. No matter how this proceeding moves forward, I will not support or approve of any form of jamming technologies. Captain Johnson, I just have to disagree with your points on jamming. It is not an appropriate solution in this case. I thank the staff for their efforts and taking the time to answer my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. We just heard the powerful and moving testimony of Captain Robert Johnson. It was 7 years ago this month that a gunman kicked down his front door and ultimately shot him 6 times in the stomach and in the chest. And as he observed, it was a hit ordered by an incarcerated criminal against an innocent man simply doing his job. It is by some pretty amazing grace that he survived. And Captain Johnson, we are grateful for your service. Mrs. Johnson, we are thankful that you were and are the rock behind the captain lo these many years. I am personally appreciative that I've come to know you and can call you friends, and we are all appreciative that each of you is here today to bear witness on this issue. Captain Johnson's story is a disturbing example of the seriousness of the threat posed by inmates' use of contraband cell phones. And I wish his was an isolated story. But the reality is that it reflects a broader epidemic. For years, contraband cell phones have been flooding into our nation's jails and prisons. They are flown into institutions via drones. They are smuggled into facilities inside everything from underwear to legal papers. And they are even shot into prison yards from makeshift cannons made out of PVC piping. Inmates are using them to run drug operations, to intimidate witnesses, to direct gang activity, to execute kidnappings, to extort money from the families and loved ones of other inmates, to conduct phone scams, and to harass innocent members of the public. The sheer numbers are staggering. Between 2012 and 2014, more than 8,700 cell phones were recovered in federal prisons alone. That's over 2,000 more than the next common type of contraband, weapons. In one state prison, during one 23-day stretch, a detection technology logged over 35,000 call and text attempts. Now, numbers aside, recent stories illustrate that there is virtually no limit on who or how far an inmate can reach with a contraband cell phone. For example, a prisoner in California was convicted in a federal court in Maine for using a contraband cell phone to run a nationwide drug distribution network. In Georgia, inmates texted the wife of one Georgia prisoner and demanded $250. When she couldn't gather the money, she was then texted an image of her husband with burns, broken fingers, and the word rat carved on his face. Also in Georgia, as Captain Johnson observed, a 9-month-old baby was shot and killed after an inmate placed a hit via a contraband cell phone in retaliation for the death of a gang member. The baby's mother, grandmother, and a family friend were severely wounded trying to protect him, ultimately in vain. In Maryland, an inmate being held on murder charges used a contraband cell phone to order the killing of a witness to his crime. Shortly thereafter, a 15-year-old gang member shot the witness, a 38-year-old father named Carl Lackle, 3 times, killing him in his own front yard. In North Carolina, a member of the Blood Street gang serving a life sentence used a contraband cell phone to mastermind the kidnapping of the father of the assistant district attorney who had prosecuted him. During the abduction, the kidnappers and the inmate exchanged at least 123 calls and text messages as they discussed how to kill and bury the victim without a trace. Fortunately, the FBI rescued the victim in the nick of time, after the order to kill him had finally gone out, and they did save his life. Now, corrections officials are literally pulling contraband phones out of prisons by the truckload, and I've seen it. I have visited Lee Correctional Institution, where Captain Johnson once worked. I have spoken with the woman who now has Captain Johnson's job. And I have observed a U-Haul-sized trailer loaded down with contraband cell phones pulled out of a prison. At every facility I've visited, and I have visited facilities in Georgia, in Kansas, in Massachusetts, in Pennsylvania, and South Carolina, from minimum security environments to death row, correction officials have told me the same thing. Finding and removing contraband cell phones is the most dangerous part of their job. A prisoner will do almost anything to hide and to keep a cell phone. As with officers, other inmates, witnesses, and other affected members of the public, this issue is not an abstraction to me. The FCC has an important role to play in promoting public safety and helping law enforcement combat this threat. And in 2013, we voted unanimously to start thinking about how to eliminate unnecessary regulations and bring down the cost of deploying technological solutions. But for far too long, the FCC did not move forward. And that's why almost 1 year ago to the day, I met Captain Johnson for the first time at a field hearing that I held in Columbia, South Carolina, along with then Governor Nikki Haley. I said then that it was time for the FCC to take action. And I gave Captain Johnson my word, as you might remember, that I would do everything in my power to make that happen. And so I am grateful today that in just the third meeting that I've had the privilege of leading, we are finally doing something. In this order, we eliminate and streamline certain rules to make it easier for correction officials to adopt technological solutions. We also appoint an ombudsman who can help all stakeholders work together to solve the problem. And to be sure, this is not the end of the road. There's a long way to go, and more the FCC can and should do. And that's why we seek comment on several other potential solutions to this problem, from requiring wireless carriers to identify and disable contraband phones in prisons, to exploring the viability of using beacon technology that creates a restricted zone in a correctional facility to stop contraband phones from working. It's important to note that the FCC can't solve this problem by itself. And so as we move forward, we will continue to collaborate with all stakeholders, government and private sector alike, to help solve this problem. We're going to get there, working in good faith with everyone, so that one day we won't hear any more stories like Captain Johnson's. I'm grateful to my colleagues at the Commission for supporting action on this important public safety issue. I'm also deeply appreciative of the Commission staff who have worked so diligently on this item for so long. A thank you to Melissa Conway, to Lloyd Coward, Tom Derringe, Anna Gentry, Neshe Gundelsberger, Roger Knoll, Muslim Sawas, and Suzanne Tatro from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. To David Firth and Tim May from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. To Ira Keltz from the Office of Engineering and Technology, and to David Horowitz, Bill Richardson, and Anjali Singh in the Office of General Counsel. Thank you as well to the corrections officials who I have had a chance to work with, some of whom are here today. Mr. Brian Sterling, the Director of the South Carolina Department of Corrections, and Colonel Jeff Dunn, Commissioner of the Alabama Department of Corrections, among others. Your work to highlight this issue and to assist us in doing our work is making the country a safer place. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn?
Aye.
Commissioner O'Reilly?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye as well. The ayes have it, so ordered. The editorial privileges granted as staff requested. Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. It is entitled Structure and Practices of the Video Relay Services Program. And again, Allison Cutler, Chief of the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, will give the introduction.
If you give us 1 second. We again have a quorum. All right. Chief Cutler, whenever you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau presents to you a report and order, notice of inquiry, further notice of proposed rulemaking, and order on improving the quality and efficiency of video relay service, or VRS. The item responds to a further notice of proposed rulemaking adopted by the Commission in 2013. For 15 years, VRS has enabled people with hearing and speech disabilities who use American Sign Language to call friends, family members, and others using a video phone and communications assistants who interpret their calls to and from other parties to the call. As beneficial as this service has been, there is ample room for improvement. Consumers of VRS want interpreters with skills to handle phone calls with doctors, lawyers, and computer help desks to ensure that technical terminology is effectively conveyed. They also need better information about the quality of services offered by competing VRS companies so they can make informed choices when selecting their VRS providers. In addition, it may be possible to provide VRS more efficiently by expanding the VRS workforce to allow communications assistants to work from home. This item takes important and timely steps to begin meeting these needs and to better ensure that the experience of individuals using VRS is functionally equivalent to voice services available to hearing individuals while preventing waste, fraud, and abuse in the VRS program. Joining me at the table today from CGB are Karen Peltz-Strauss and Bob Aldrich. I would also like to thank Elliot Greenwald, Susan Barr, and Michael Scott from the Disability Rights Office, as well as staff in the Office of Managing Director, Enforcement Bureau, Office of Strategic Planning, as well as the Office of the General Counsel for their many contributions. Bob will now present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. We are pleased to present this item, which amends the Commission's rules on video relay service in several areas and seeks comment on additional rule changes and quality of service issues. First, the report and order authorizes, on an 8-month trial basis, the routing of VRS calls to interpreters who are skilled in interpreting medical, legal, and technical conversations to improve the speed and accuracy of these calls. Second, it authorizes a trial of qualified deaf interpreters to supplement the interpreting performed by hearing interpreters on certain calls, such as calls from people with limited signing ability or with cognitive disabilities. The data collected from both of these trials will help the Commission determine whether to authorize the use of these specialized interpreters on a permanent basis. Third, to help consumers compare VRS providers, the report and order directs Commission staff to publish monthly data on how quickly each provider responds to consumers' requests to place a VRS call, in other words, on each provider's speed of answer. Fourth, the item authorizes VRS providers to make video phone numbers available to hearing people who know sign language so they can have direct dial video calls with deaf consumers who sign. Finally, the item initiates a 1-year pilot program by which communications assistants may work from home-based VRS workstations subject to specific measures to ensure compliance with the Commission's rules on privacy and other matters and to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. Next, the Notice of Inquiry seeks comment on performance metrics and methods for measuring the quality of VRS, including those that consider the accuracy of sign language interpretation, the technical quality of video and voice transmissions and reception, the interoperability of provider networks, and continuity of service. Further, the NOI seeks comments on how the Commission should address phony VRS calls, such as calls that are made to harass or threaten a communications assistant, and on how technologies that do not rely on VRS can serve the communications needs of people who have hearing or speech disabilities. A further notice of proposed rulemaking, also included in the item, seeks comments on the contours of a new 4-year provider compensation plan. To maintain a rate structure that encourages the provision of VRS by multiple service providers, the item proposes, in a slightly modified form from what is now used, a system of tiered compensation rates whereby providers' initial monthly minutes of service within specified benchmarks are compensated at a higher rate, and the smallest providers are compensated for all their minutes at a rate that reflects higher per minute costs. In addition, the FNPRM seeks comment on alternative rate-making methodologies. The FNPRM also proposes other VRS improvements, which include a more efficient means of routing VRS calls to their destinations, enabling database registration and call validation for video phones used in enterprises and public spaces, allowing customer support centers to access the TRS numbering directory to enable direct video calling by individuals with disabilities who use sign language, and implementing a more efficient method of validating VRS calls. To ensure that all VRS services, all relay services keep pace with improvements in technology, the FNPRM proposes to authorize the fund administrator to continue including appropriate amounts for research and development in the budget for TRS. In addition, the FNPRM seeks comment on whether to prohibit a VRS provider from providing non-service related inducements, such as video game systems, to sign up for or to continue to use the provider's service, and whether to prohibit non-compete provisions in VRS providers' employment contracts with sign language interpreters. Last, the item includes an order that would temporarily defer the effectiveness of a recently adopted VRS interoperability standard pending authorization of the new call routing method proposed in the further notice. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Aldrich. We'll turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Clyburn.
It should go without saying, but I will give voice to it anyway. Video relay service is a vitally important program for those in our community who are deaf and hard of hearing. It provides access to a world beyond American Sign Language, allowing individuals to more seamlessly connect and communicate to those who literally do not speak their language. And providing such access is not only the right thing to do, it is key to fulfilling the functional equivalence goal mandated by the Communications Act. As an FCC Commissioner, I welcome the opportunity to improve service for those who need it, enable choice for all consumers, and promote robust competition in an ever-evolving marketplace. And if we can achieve these objectives while simultaneously making a service more cost-effective for the ratepayers who support it, then that docket will have my support. The item we adopt today proposes several key steps that can improve VRS going forward by piloting several trials, both for users and for VRS providers who are looking to attract qualified interpreters. It also seeks comment on how to improve service quality and devotes significant thought to restructuring our compensation system so that users will continue to have choice in the market, all while ensuring that the Commission and the ratepayers are getting the best bang for their buck. I am particularly pleased that the draft includes questions on how to decrease scam calls to VRS users. Just last month, the IRS issued a warning about a new scam targeting VRS users. Like you, I believe it is downright shameful that people are taking advantage of deaf and hard of hearing individuals via VRS or any other means. And I am pretty sure that it is not accidental that the chairman has included in a separate docket today the opportunity for us to take action to combat the problem of scams, robocalls. If it was accidental, don't own up to it. It is only fitting that we do the same for VRS users. I am also pleased that we see comment on how to decrease competitive bottlenecks by improving access to interpreters and on how to address inducements that some providers may use to lure individuals to use their service. As always, my thanks go to the Consumer and Government Affairs Bureau, as well as those in the Disability Rights Office, for working to ensure that individuals with disabilities are closer to communicating with the world in a functionally equivalent manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. We'll next turn to Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the end of the 4-year glide path for video relay service rates soon approaching, the Commission takes the opportunity to comprehensively re-examine the rates and other aspects of the VRS program. As the Commission takes this next step, which I generally support, the focus should be on ensuring an efficient and sustainable program that is targeted to meeting the actual needs of the deaf and hard of hearing community. Telecommunications relay services, including VRS, have been described as a means to bridge the gap between communications technologies available to people who have communications disabilities and the community at large. Therefore, I want to ensure that the VRS program is targeted to bridge the actual demonstrated gaps, as consumers As consumers as a whole migrate to new technologies, apps, and services, the Commission should consider to what extent these innovations are being used by and can benefit those with communications disabilities as well. We already know that they are quite popular among the hearing impaired community, but we need to know to what extent and to what degree they operate as a replacement function for voice, which seems to be quite substantial just as it is in the overall population. To the extent that off-the-shelf technologies, such as free texting applications, can better serve and more effectively serve as means to embrace, we need to enjoy and grab a hold of these technologies to prove that they can meet true functional equivalency without depending on the fund to provide the sole solution. The burden on carriers and ultimately ratepayers to pay for VRS and other telecommunications relay services must be targeted to what is actually necessary to meet the statutory obligation, and relying in part on non-VRS technology is one way to help advance that goal. In approaching this proceeding, I am also focused on the statutory requirement to ensure that TRS be provided in the most efficient manner. There are a couple aspects to this. First, at my request, the NOI on performance goals and metrics now includes efficiency and cost effectiveness as explicit goals for the program, consistent with the statute. Second, the item seeks comment on possible rate changes, including the joint VRS providers proposal, as well as other possible methodologies, including price caps and market-based mechanisms. I welcome input on ways to create a cost-effective structure that is sustainable over the long term. I've been sympathetic to the idea that the smaller providers should have a reasonable opportunity to reach the optimum scale to compete effectively. For that reason, I'm supportive of an interim rate freeze. I supported, an interim rate freeze last year. As we look ahead, however, I want to be assured that the providers are on track to sustain their operations based on reasonable costs and funding levels. We also have to accept that certain structural reforms proposed by prior commissions may never happen. Instead of continuing to point to the absence of these reforms as a justification for various rate changes, we need to look at new ideas to place the program on solid footing. For example, the item seeks comment on improving interoperability. In this vein, let me be very clear. In approving this item, I in no way endorse the concept that the Commission has any authority over domain names. I previously opposed expanding the Commission's authority over telephone numbers to IP addresses and domain names as part of the net neutrality item. So it is an issue that I will watch closely as the record develops. If there is a specific and narrowing targeted change to the statute that can improve routing without setting dangerous precedent in other contexts, then the Commission should respectfully recommend it to Congress. Third, the item also embarks on various trials, justified in part on the premise that potential changes could make the program more efficient and ultimately save money. To be clear, I have significant reservations about the Commission's legal authority to conduct trials in any capacity, including in the TRS program, and the cost and benefits of the expansive new data collections. Since the Commission is determined to go down this path, I will reluctantly agree to see how it plays out. However, count me as one that will be not supportive of making permanent changes unless the trials definitively demonstrate that such changes would actually make the program more efficient and cost effective. I thank the Chairman for accommodating a number of my proposed changes and the staff for their diligent work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. In the finals of the 1964 NCAA Men's National Basketball Championship, Duke lost to UCLA 98-83. I think we can all agree that Duke's defeat is 1 point in 1964's favor. But something else notable happened that year. AT&T introduced the first video phone, trademarked as the picture phone. And they did this at the New York World's Fair. In a demonstration of the new device, 2 deaf users in 2 different cities were able to communicate freely with each other. Now, the picture phone was a commercial flop, but it laid the groundwork for what we now call Video Relay Service, or VRS. VRS has been critical to providing deaf and hard of hearing individuals with the ability to communicate in a way that many of us take for granted, such as making a phone call to order a pizza. But as beneficial as this service has been, we can do better. And so I'm thrilled that today we take steps to meaningfully improve VRS. A couple of them deserve special mention. First, we are authorizing a voluntary 8-month trial of skills-based routing of calls. And here's why this matters. When someone who is deaf or hard of hearing has a matter that requires some technical language to explain, say a medical problem or a computer support issue, he or she can't necessarily be sure that a VRS interpreter will know all of the relevant terms or how best to translate those terms. With skills-based routing, interpreters who specialize in medical, legal, and computer support terminology can enable those with disabilities to use VRS to communicate with doctors, lawyers, and computer technicians. I called for the FCC to implement a pilot project involving skills-based routing almost 5 years ago, and so I'm happy that it is finally coming to fruition. Second, we are approving a trial for deaf interpreters. Deaf interpreters are invaluable when a deaf or hard of hearing person with cognitive or mobility challenges or limited English or American Sign Language proficiency has difficulty communicating with a hearing person, even a person proficient in ASL. A deaf interpreter's unique experience and background can help bridge this communications gap. Now, together, these two trials will further Congress's goal of achieving functional equivalence of communications services, while also providing the Commission with valuable data to inform potential future action on these issues. Additionally, we ask the public to weigh in on many issues important to the future of VRS. For example, we hope to evaluate what performance goals and quality service metrics can improve the VRS program's effectiveness. And we seek information about phony VRS calls involving scams or spoofing, calls that both waste taxpayer funds and harm consumers. We also propose another 4-year VRS compensation rate plan, and we ask whether there are alternative plans that can promote competition and fiscal responsibility. In sum, we have come a long way since the picture phone, and I'm optimistic that our action today will help us go a long way further. I look forward to working with my colleagues on further steps to ensure that deaf and hard of hearing Americans are provided with functionally equivalent communications services, or, in English, are brought over to the right side of the digital divide. Finally, I would like to thank the staff for all the hard work on this comprehensive and critical matter. Bob Aldrich, Susan Barr, Elliot Greenwald, Allison Cutler, Karen Peltz-Strauss, and Michael Scott from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, David Schmidt and Dana Schaefer from the Office of Managing Director, and Terry Kavanaugh from the Office of General Counsel. It will be no small thing to walk into this building tomorrow morning knowing that you have helped those whose world is silent better communicate with the outside world, if not communicate, period. Thanks to you for your public service. And with that, we will proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn?
Aye.
Commissioner Riley?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Boy, we're almost halfway done. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented by the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and is entitled Amendment of Parts 1 and 22 of the Commission's rules with regard to cellular service, including changes in licensing of unserved areas. Neisha Gindelsberger, Acting Chief of the Bureau, again will give the introduction.
Ms. Gindelsberger, welcome back to the hot seat. Feel free to go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. It's my pleasure to introduce the cellular service reform item, which revises and eliminates outdated regulations that hinder development of advanced broadband services such as LTE. These revisions will reduce barriers to innovation and investment in new technologies, reduce unnecessary regulatory burdens on licensees, promote greater spectrum efficiency, and facilitate the deployment of ubiquitous broadband connectivity in the 800 megahertz cellular spectrum. I'm joined at the table by Jim Schlichting, Linda Chang, Tom Derenge, Mazlum Savez, and Nina Shafran. In addition to the Wireless Bureau team at the table, I would like to thank Roger Noel and Lloyd Coward, as well as staff in the Office of Engineering Technology, Office of the General Counsel, and the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for their hard work and commitment to delivering this item. Nina will present the item.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, I am pleased to present the cellular service reform item. The item includes a second report and order, a report and order, and a second further notice of proposed rulemaking. The 800 megahertz cellular service band was the original spectrum used in cell phones in the United States and is still widely used in wireless handsets today. However, many of the technical and licensing rules pertaining to this service were adopted decades ago, when today's new mobile broadband technologies did not exist, and they are now sadly out of date. The draft orders would, most importantly, update the radiated power rules, giving cellular licensees the option to comply with limits based on power spectral density, or PSD. This is critical for efficient deployment of LTE and other mobile broadband services in the cellular band. The revised power rules would allow cellular licensees to choose technologies that work best for their wireless service to consumers without being disadvantaged by rules designed for the era of narrowband technologies. PSD is already permitted under our rules for other commercial wireless services, such as broadband PCS and the 700 megahertz service. Adding this option for cellular licensees would therefore promote consistency across various wireless spectrum bands. The draft makes conforming changes to certain other technical rules to accommodate the use of PSD, such as establishing a separate methodology for PSD systems to determine their cellular service area boundaries. The power reforms also include protection for neighboring systems, especially public safety systems, and facilitate improved coexistence among licensees that share the 800 megahertz band. The draft retains existing protections, including the requirement that cellular licensees resolve, at their expense, interference that they cause to public safety systems. It adds safeguards to avoid the potential for increased interference to public safety systems, and it directs Bureau staff to convene a public forum to engage stakeholders in a conversation about the next steps they can take to improve spectrum sharing in this band. The licensing reforms continue the transition to a geographic-based regime, provide licensees with more flexibility, and reduce administrative and filing burdens. These reforms will enable cellular licensees to respond more quickly and at lower cost to changing market conditions and consumer demand. The draft also eliminates the comparative hearing process for cellular license renewals. As with the technical rule changes, the licensing reforms promote similar treatment of commercial wireless spectrum bands. The second further notice seeks comment on other measures to give cellular licensees more flexibility and administrative relief, and on ways to consolidate and simplify the rules, not only for the cellular service, but also other geographically licensed wireless services. For example, it seeks comment on the possibility of relocating the cellular rules in Part 22 and rules for certain other commercial mobile radio services to Part 27 of the rules. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges to make technical and conforming edits. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And with that, we will turn to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. During our Connecting Communities tour last year, I heard firsthand from students, entrepreneurs, healthcare providers, and others about the opportunities and challenges of bringing robust, affordable communication services to their communities. No matter where I traveled, consumers of wireless services in 11 of those states made it clear that they expected to have robust and continuous mobile connectivity where they live, work, and when they have time, Mr. Chairman, play. With a notable exception of large swaths of tribal lands in New Mexico and Arizona, those expectations were largely being met. As consumers' insatiable consumption of mobile data services continues, it behooves us to ensure that our regulatory framework keeps up with the ever-evolving wireless landscape and that our policies promote rather than thwart continued investment in new wireless services. With today's item, the Commission takes an important step to provide cellular band licensees increased flexibility and much-needed consistency in licensing across commercial wireless services. Notably, the Commission revises the radiated power rules for the cellular band, while safeguarding public safety operations from possible increased interference because of these changes. The rules adopted in the order and proposed in the further notice will no doubt assist wireless carriers in their efforts to keep up with the expected 7-fold increase in mobile data traffic over the next 5 years. But what we also make clear is that the agency will continue to protect important public safety operations and help facilitate stakeholder discussions. Many thanks, again, are due to this team and the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau for working to move away from outdated paradigms and facilitate ubiquitous connectivity in wireless services.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The item before us, which I'm pleased to support, will permit wireless providers to offer LTE on their 800 megahertz cellular networks while protecting adjacent public safety systems. By simply modifying the cellular power rules to also include workable power metrics for wideband technologies, we provide companies the flexibility to deploy the technology on their choosing. In permitting LTE on this band, we are in effect improving spectrum efficiency and facilitating mobile broadband deployment. It also places cellular spectrum on the same footing as other commercial services such as PCS, AWS, and 700 megahertz. My only critique of today's item is that the petition requesting this change was filed in 2012. The Commission must ensure that its rules are current, technology neutral, and promote flexible use. When they are not, it can't take 5 years to update them. That being said, I am hopeful that we will move on the proposals in the further notice to eliminate unnecessary and costly rules that may disadvantage cellular licensees as compared to other commercial licensees as quick as possible. Similarly, today's item references the Commission's WRS reform proceeding that was started in 2010. This proceeding, which considers such things as harmonizing renewal procedures and permanent discontinuance policies for multiple spectrum bands, should finally be concluded. The Commission should also finish the proceeding to eliminate the CMRS presumption in Part 20 of the Commission rules. Although this seems to be a minor change, it would further harmonize cellular with the flexible use policies in place for other wireless services. I thank the staff for their work on this item and look forward to working with them on the other items as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. The FCC first adopted rules governing commercial cellular service in 1981, the same year that MTV was launched. And one of the very first videos that MTV aired was Rockin' the Paradise by Styx. Now, notably, the song's lyrics included the following: "We need long-term, slow burn, getting it done, and some straight-talking, hard-working son of a gun. Let's stick together and futurize our attitudes." Now, those lyrics underscore, and I'm sure Commissioner Clyburn does not remember this since she's just turned 29.
I do have the Styx album, though.
Get out. Come sail away. Who knew? Wow, very nice, very nice.
Vinyl or CD form?
Yes, I had a birthday yesterday, don't start.
I didn't realize. Happy birthday.
Yeah, happy belated.
Very belated.
You only turned 29 once, so make it count.
Absolutely, make it count.
But those lyrics underscore our decision today to modernize our cellular licensing and power rules. MTV has evolved enormously since its inception, but those rules that I just mentioned and that Anina observed in her presentation have largely stayed the same. And so we update into this order the various technical and service rules in the 800 megahertz cellular band. We also conform our cellular rules to those of other commercial wireless services with respect to out-of-band emissions, power measurement, field strength, and discontinuance of operations. Our cellular rules, gosh, I'm having trouble saying that today, cellular rules were adopted when commercial mobile service relied upon narrowband technologies. Over 3.5 decades later, these rules and the technical assumptions that underlay them are hopelessly obsolete. A long-term evolution, or LTE, is now well developed and broadly deployed. It offers consumers high-speed access that lets us stream videos, including Rockin' the Paradise, which you can find online, to mobile devices, which are more powerful now than personal computers that existed in 1981. But the legacy rules limit wireless coverage for companies that want to deploy LTE. Well, that state of affairs changes today. The reforms that we are adopting will help wireless companies better meet consumer demand for mobile connectivity and continue to innovate by facilitating the use of cellular spectrum to provide advanced services like LTE. I, too, like my colleagues, would like to thank the Commission's dedicated staff, including Linda Chang, Lloyd Coward, Tom Derringe, Neshi Gundelsberger, Roger Noel, Muslim Sawis, Jim Schlichting, and Nina Shafran in the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Michael Ha and Ira Keltz in the Office of Engineering and Technology, and David Firth, Brian Marenko, and Michael Wilhelm in the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Thanks to your labors, we are sticking together, and we are futurizing our attitudes about cellular licensing in ways that will benefit consumers in the years to come. And with that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn? Aye. Commissioner Riley?
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Madam Secretary, if you could please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the next item on your agenda will be presented by the International Bureau and is entitled Section 43.62 Reporting Requirements for U.S. Providers of International Services. Tom Sullivan, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
All right. Chief Sullivan, whenever you are ready.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. The International Bureau is pleased to present this Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. It examines the need for international reporting requirements set forth in Section 43.62 of the Commission's rules. Commenters in the Commission's 2016 biennial review request that the Commission streamline or eliminate these reporting requirements. The notice before you proposes to eliminate the annual traffic and revenue reports and to streamline the annual circuit capacity reports. It seeks comments on the costs and benefits of these proposals. I would like to thank IB's hardworking team for their work on this item. Troy Tanner, Walt Strack, and Kathleen Collins in our front office, and Denise Coca, Francis Gutierrez, David Kretsch, Arthur Lechtman, Kim Cook, Gabrielle Kim, Jerry Duvall, Irene Wu, Heidi Kroll, Lindsay Tello, and Daniel Scheinman in the division. Seated with me are Troy Tanner, Deputy Chief, Walt Strack, Chief Economist, and Denise Coca, David Kretsch, and Arthur Lechtman. Arthur will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The NPRM before you seeks comment on the Commission's Section 43.62 reporting requirements for providers of international telecommunications services, namely the annual traffic and revenue and circuit capacity reports. The NPRM indicates that these reports are no longer necessary in their current form, proposes to eliminate the annual traffic and revenue reports altogether, and seeks comment on whether there are ways to further streamline the circuit capacity reports. The Section 43.62 traffic and revenue reports consist of traffic and revenue data for international voice services, international private lines, and international miscellaneous services. The bulk of the data in these reports consists of minutes of voice traffic for all U.S. international routes and the revenue and payouts associated with these minutes. Each year, the International Bureau releases a report summarizing the aggregate traffic and revenue data. Historically, the primary role of the reports has been to monitor settlement rates on U.S. international routes. As the market for international telecommunications has liberalized and competition has grown, the Commission has determined that most routes are competitive, based in large part on the traffic and revenue reports. In addition, traditional international voice service providers face competition today from VoIP providers. Industry spends approximately 15,000 hours per year preparing its traffic and revenue submissions. The costs of this data collection, which are significant both for filers and for the Commission, now exceed the benefits of the information. Given this burden and the current competitive nature of the international telecommunications sector, the NPRM proposes to eliminate the traffic and revenue reports and asks what effect elimination will have on U.S. consumers and U.S. carriers. With respect to the circuit capacity reports, Section 43.62 requires providers of international telecommunication services to annually identify their submarine cable, satellite, and terrestrial capacity between the United States and foreign points. The Commission receives two types of data regarding submarine cables. One, submarine cable operators report the available and planned capacity of their submarine cable systems. And two, common carriers and submarine cable licensees report the capacity that they own or lease on a submarine cable. The Commission also receives world total circuit data for terrestrial and satellite facilities. As with the traffic and revenue reports, each year the Commission releases a report summarizing the collected capacity data. The NPRM proposes to retain the circuit capacity reports as the benefits appear to exceed the costs of collecting this data at this time, but seeks comment on whether there are ways to further streamline the reports. The Commission uses the data from the circuit capacity reports for market analysis, national security and public safety purposes, and to determine annual regulatory fees. With regard to national security, the Commission and national security agencies use the circuit capacity data to ensure that U.S. international telecommunications are safe from disruption and to provide information about key routes and whether there are alternative cables or satellite facilities available to provide communications to specific locations. The NPRM seeks comment on the burdens of preparing information for this report and on ways to streamline and improve the circuit capacity requirements. For example, the NPRM asks whether there are alternatives or substitutes for the data and at what cost. The NPRM seeks comment on how to resolve discrepancies that staff have observed between cable capacity reported by cable operators and capacity reported by cable capacity holders of the same cable. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges only to make technical or conforming edits.
Thank you, Mr. Lechman. We'll now go to comments from the bench, starting with Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you. You might appreciate this, so I will be brief today. As regulators, I believe it is important for us to regularly assess whether our current reporting requirements are still in the public interest. This is why I support this notice of proposed rulemaking, which seeks comment on whether the traffic and revenue reports and the circuit capacity reports continue to be necessary in their current form. I look forward to reviewing the record that develops and thank the International Bureau for your hard work on this item.
Thank you, Commissioner. Short and sweet. Commissioner Riley.
Be a little bit longer. After a 5-year absence, it is nice to see Section 11 reviews resurrected at the Commission. For whatever reason, I couldn't seem to get the last Commission to expedite the review process or even the approval process for issuing the simple public notice to initiate the review. Despite that bizarre lack of interest and focus, I thank the staff for the International Bureau for suggesting, in response to comments filed in their biennial review docket, that we eliminate the traffic and revenue report and potentially streamline the circuit capacity report. In preparing this notice, I appreciate the efforts to quantify the cost of these reports using a combination of estimates provided in a past Paperwork Reduction Act filing and information about the actual number of reports filed. While not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, at the notice stage, it does provide some baseline for purposes of comments. It should shock no one to learn that the Commission frequently underestimates the cost of its reporting requirements. In order to help rectify this, I hope that commenters will provide information regarding the true burdens of these reports. The quantitative analysis of potential benefits contained within this document, however, is essentially absent. But this information is necessary as the reason for retaining the circuit capacity report is that the benefits appear to exceed the cost of collecting this data. Frankly, I'm not convinced at this time that the Commission should retain this annual reporting requirement. It is apparent that more work needs to be done here. Generally, I hope that commenters will take the time to provide thorough analysis of the report's benefits or lack thereof. In the same vein, this document should be only a first step of many in reducing the paperwork burdens that we place on our regulated entities. For instance, today's item points out that Commission PRA filing asserts that each filer spends a little more than 150 hours preparing the traffic and revenue report. But one commenter asserts that, in truth, it spends nearly twice as much, or 300 hours. While this is just a drop in the bucket when you consider the Commission-mandated information collection comes to a combined total of about 73 million hours annually, and this is most likely underestimated, it is at least a start. I look forward to working with my colleagues and the Commission staff to find other information collections that can be combined, shortened, or altogether eliminated. I thank the Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly, and I'll start with, as you started, Section 11 of the Communications Act, a provision that requires the FCC to review every telecommunications regulation on the books every 2 years and to, quote, determine whether it is no longer necessary in the public interest as a result of meaningful economic competition between providers of such service. Now, for many years, the FCC treated this biennial review obligation like a check-the-box assignment. Agency staff spent many hours compiling outdated regulations that were ripe for repeal, and the FCC did nothing. And I know this because I used to be one of those staffers. But times are changing. Today, the FCC takes steps to eliminate and streamline 2 categories of outdated reporting requirements. In response to matters teed up during the 2016 biennial review process, we propose today to eliminate the annual traffic and revenue report and to streamline the circuit capacity report, each of which places filing burdens on U.S. providers of international services. And we do this because we believe that the costs of these data collections in their current form exceed the benefits, both to the FCC and to companies alike. For instance, over 1,800 entities had to file information for the 2016 International Traffic and Revenue Report. And countless employees spent thousands of hours preparing, submitting, and analyzing this data. Yet the Commission didn't need this information in order to discharge its duties. And that's because the marketplace for international communications services is, as Mr. Lechtman pointed out during his presentation, by all accounts, more competitive. Indeed, that's why the FCC ended its international settlements policy in 2012. It unanimously concluded then, based on, in part, a 2010 traffic report, that the market has seen significant competitive growth, making the policy not only superfluous, but counterproductive. And I believe that this is now true of the report itself. It is our hope that the resources currently devoted to complying with these unnecessary reporting requirements will be applied to more productive use, namely, connecting American consumers now and in the future. This is the latest step we have taken toward modernizing our rules and enabling the private sector to deploy infrastructure rather than teams of lawyers and accountants. I hope that these proposals will be adopted in the near future. Now, as Commissioner O'Reilly pointed out, this doesn't end our work in this vineyard. Going forward, we should ensure that our reporting requirements are a function of actual need, not agency inertia, and that the benefits of this information collection, any information collection, outweigh the costs. I, too, would like to thank the staff of the International Bureau for the hard work on this item, particularly Denise Coca, Kate Collins, Kim Cook, Jerry Duvall, Francis Gutierrez, Gabrielle Kim, David Kretsch, Heidi Kroll, Arthur Lechtman, David Scheinman, Walt Strack, Tom Sullivan, Troy Tanner, Lindsay Tello, and Irene Wu. We really appreciate all that you've done. With that, we'll proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Clyburn.
Sorry.
Oh, I was leaving us in suspense. All right.
Oh, no.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Madam Secretary, please announce the next item on today's agenda.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the 6th item on your agenda will be presented by the Media Bureau and is entitled Channel Sharing by Full Power and Class A Stations Outside the Broadcast Television Spectrum Incentive Auction Context. Michelle Carey, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
This report and order that expands the rules permitting television broadcasters to share a single TV channel. We believe that these rules will enhance the ability of television stations to channel share and therefore help mitigate the impact of the incentive auction in the repacking process. Joining me at the table are Hillary DeNigro, Martha Heller, and Sean Maher from the Media Bureau, and Jean Cadieux, Deputy Chair of the Incentive Auction Task Force. Sean will present the item.
Thank you, Michelle. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The report. Good afternoon. Oh, here.
No, but I feel you, Sean.
The report and order before you today would permit additional channel sharing between broadcast television stations. In 2012 and 2014, the Commission adopted rules to allow full power and Class A television stations that relinquish spectrum in the broadcast incentive auction to share a channel with another station. In 2015, the Commission adopted rules allowing low-power television, or LPTV stations, and TV translator stations to channel share. This was done to mitigate the impact on those stations that may be displaced through the incentive auction repacking process. This report and order expands channel sharing opportunities in several respects. First, it adopts rules to permit full power and Class A stations to continue to channel share once their initial auction-related channel sharing agreements, or CSAs, expire or are terminated, what we call second-generation channel sharing. Permitting second-generation CSAs is a logical extension of the Commission's 2014 decision to adopt more flexible auction-related channel sharing rules and to permit term-limited CSAs. Second, this report and order adopts rules to provide more channel sharing opportunities for LPTV and TV translators, so-called secondary stations. Specifically, it allows all secondary stations to share a channel with either another secondary station or with a primary full power or Class A station. This new flexibility will further assist secondary stations that are displaced by the incentive auction and repacking process. It will enable some displaced stations to continue to operate in the post-auction television bands and may reduce construction and operating costs for resource-constrained secondary stations, including small, minority-owned, and niche stations. Third, the report and order permits Class A television stations, including those that are not a party to an auction-related CSA, to channel share outside of the auction context. With respect to MVPD carriage rights, the report and order provides that stations that entered second-generation CSAs will have the same carriage rights at their shared location that they would have if they were not channel sharing. The order similarly provides that secondary stations and Class A stations that share for the first time outside of the auction will have the same carriage rights at their shared location that they otherwise would have if the station is exercising must-carry rights on its existing channel on the date of the closing and reassignment public notice. This public notice will be issued at the end of the incentive auction. We treat Class A stations participating in second-generation CSAs differently. These stations will have the same carriage rights at their shared location that they would have if they were not channel sharing if the station exercised carriage rights under its original auction-related CSA. Our approach will ensure that the additional channel sharing flexibility provided by this order does not permit television stations to use channel sharing as a shortcut to obtaining cable carriage rights. The Media Bureau recommends that the Commission adopt the report and order and requests editorial privileges to make necessary technical or conforming edits. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marr. We'll now turn to Commissioner Clyburn.
On the surface, our channel sharing report and order, designed to establish rules among broadcast television stations outside of the incentive auction context, might look and sound like just another technical proceeding before the Commission. While it is true that the actions leading up to this report and order and those needed to implement it are technical in nature, the more meaningful story should actually be what channel sharing means for those who love broadcast television, as well as the opportunities it presents for the nation's smallest broadcasters. In the 5 years since Congress passed the Spectrum Act, I have heard from many LPTV and translator stations that they are in fear of being displaced following the incentive auction repacking process. Today's report and order had the potential to do more to put those station owners at ease, but I am less confident today of that happening than when the item originally circulated. Establishing channel sharing between secondary stations or with full power or Class A stations has the ability to provide these stations with a new lease on life, providing them the opportunity to continue serving their communities with diverse and local television programming. As the order correctly recognizes, channel sharing can help resource-constrained Class A and secondary stations, including existing small minority and niche stations, reduce operating costs, and provide them with additional net income to strengthen operations and improve programming services. Channel sharing may also enable secondary stations to expand their coverage area, which would mean bringing more variety programming to more households. What disappoints me is that today, we have actually closed the door on the very rare instances in which a secondary station could gain must-carry rights as a result of channel sharing. In doing so, we have stricken from the order a simple acknowledgement that the benefits of channel sharing for secondary stations outweigh any theoretical increase in the number of secondary stations cable operators may be required to carry. Nonetheless, I acknowledge that LPTV stations are free to privately negotiate for carriage, and am hopeful that many stations will find this to be a viable option. According to the FCC's own data, LPTV stations are a relative bright spot when it comes to broadcast ownership diversity. Women own 13.9% of low-power television stations compared to just 6.3% of full-power commercial television stations in 2013. Similarly, the Commission's own data found that Hispanics own 3% of full-power stations compared to 10% of low-power television stations. I am still optimistic that the expanded channel sharing options authorized by this order will help provide the boost needed to keep more women and minorities in the broadcast business. I thank the Media Bureau staff, including Sean Muir, Kim Matthews, Martha Heller, and others for their work on this item. Your efforts enable channel sharing, ensure that the public airways are used efficiently, and that they are used for the greatest public good. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to affirm, I approve in part and concur in part.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I may have a longer statement I'll submit for the record, but I'll make a couple points. The central purpose of this item is to establish rules for television channel sharing outside the scope of the broadcast incentive auction. A main component in doing so is determining the sharing procedures for incentive auction channel sharers that essentially divorce and seek to marry another partner in the future. Another aspect is permitting sharing in the future by certain stations that do not establish a sharing arrangement during the incentive auction. In reality, the number of instances triggering these rules is not expected to be significantly high, but when needed, these rules will provide a flexible but necessary structure and offer some certainty for television stations that have a sharing partner today or may seek one in the future. As such, I'm willing to support the item. One area that is particularly important, the Commission makes clear that changes made to the text before us compared to the circulated version, that television station must-carry rights are not being expanded in any aspect. Simply put, the item maintains the status quo with regards to must-carry. Whatever rights stations had to trigger must-carry previously are maintained, and no new rights are being created. As someone who's not particularly the biggest supporter of must-carry, we are correctly deciding not to reopen that can of worms here. I thank the staff for all of their hard work and the chairman for accepting my edits.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I, too, have a longer statement that I'll submit for the record, but since I'm feeling a little bit nostalgic about the 80s, I'll go back to that. The Care Bears taught a generation of children television viewers that sharing is caring. I know you remember that. Sticks and Care Bears, that was very popular in the Clyburn household, I'm sure. But now, sharing is about to play an important role in broadcast television itself. Now, channel sharing may be a difficult concept for non-engineers to appreciate, but it's an important one, as we've heard. It'll help facilitate the continued availability of TV stations following the FCC's incentive auction. It promotes the efficient use of spectrum by allowing 2 or more broadcast stations to share a single 6 megahertz channel, and it helps the public to benefit from free over-the-air programming in the time to come. Now, the Commission realized this when it previously established rules permitting primary stations that chose to relinquish spectrum in the incentive auction to share a channel with another station. But these rules limited sharing to the auction context. And so what happened after the auction's end and after auction-related channel sharing agreements expired was an open question. Today we answer that question by allowing broadcast TV stations to channel share outside of the incentive auction context. And I won't go into the reasons why that is advantageous, as my colleagues and the staff have covered it quite adequately. I will say, however, that we are in debt to the dedicated Commission staff across the many bureaus and offices who work so diligently on this complex order. From the Media Bureau, I'd like to thank Michelle Carey, Hillary DeNigro, Martha Heller, Sean Maher, and Kim Matthews. From the Office of General Counsel, thank you to David Consul and Bill Scher. And last but certainly not least, thanks to the Incentive Auction Task Force's very own Gene Cadieux. Pardon the bad pun, but the credit deserves to be shared among all of you in the time to come. With that, we will proceed to a vote. Commissioner Clyburn. Okay. Prudent Park Concurrent Part. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Aye.
The chair votes aye as well. The item is adopted with editorial privileges granted as requested. Madam Secretary, please announce the next issue.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the final item on your agenda will be a presentation by the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, updating you on the status of its continuing inquiry into the AT&T Mobility 911 outage that occurred on March 8, 2017. Lisa Folks, Acting Chief of the Bureau, will give the presentation. Introduction.
So whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Clyburn, Commissioner O'Reilly. As you know, one of the FCC's fundamental responsibilities is to promote the safety of life and property through wire and radio communication. Central to this mission is ensuring reliable 911 service. And simply put, the public expects and deserves calls to 911, perhaps the most important phone call you will ever make in your life, to go through. That is why 2 weeks ago, when AT&T Mobility outages affected 911 service across the country, Chairman Pai immediately directed the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau to conduct an investigation into the root causes of the outages and their impact. Today we present you with a status update based on our preliminary inquiry, including meetings with AT&T Mobility, public safety officials, and other stakeholders. Please note that our understanding of the circumstances surrounding the outages is only preliminary, and this analysis may change as our investigation continues and our understanding of the facts evolves. On March 8, 2017, an outage affected users of AT&T Mobility's Voice over LTE 911 service. Voice over LTE is the technology used to transmit voice calls over a carrier's 4G LTE network. According to AT&T, on a normal day, it would expect its total Voice over LTE 911 phone call volume to be approximately 44,000 calls nationwide. During the event, approximately 12,600 unique callers were not able to reach 911 directly, although a small subset of these calls were answered by a backup call center and routed to first responders. The outage appears to have affected Voice over LTE 911 calls for approximately 5 hours in the southeast, central U.S., and portions of the northeast region of the U.S., and eventually affected a significant portion of Voice over LTE 911 calls in the remaining portion of the country. It appears that AT&T reconfigured connections in its network that affected 911 call routing for its Voice over LTE subscribers. As a result of these changes, automated call routing capability for Voice over LTE 911 calls failed. This activated a fallback mechanism which routed Voice over LTE 911 calls to a backup call routing center for manual processing. The volume of calls, however, exceeded the call center's capability to manually process these calls, resulting in a large number of calls being blocked. Some customers received fast busy signals when attempting to call 911, and when unable to connect with 911 call centers, commonly known as Public Safety Answering Points or PSAPs. According to affected PSAPs, some customers reported that calls to 911 would ring continuously without being answered, while other customers reported hearing nothing at all. Preliminary conversations with public safety officials and other stakeholders indicate that they received notice of the outage through various sources, including AT&T's Twitter feed, phone calls and emails from service providers to designated officials, and from other public safety entities. In some cases, public safety officials initiated contact with AT&T to confirm that a 911 outage was taking place and to verify the scope of the outage. State 911 entities took timely and appropriate steps to notify consumers of the outage and of alternative emergency contact information through mass notification services, social media, and television and radio broadcasts. For example, public safety officials in Orange County, Florida, reported that they reached out to local broadcast stations to run a visual crawl that contained a 10-digit alternative emergency number available to AT&T Mobility consumers affected by the outage. Public safety entities also reported using Twitter to notify consumers of the outage and alternative emergency contact information. These outreach efforts directed the public to alternative emergency phone numbers during a time of need. Public safety officials in Orange County, Florida, for example, reported that they received 172 calls to an alternative emergency phone number in the hour and a half after they released the number. Please note that 3 days later, on March 11th, after our investigation was announced and underway, a second AT&T Mobility outage occurred. This outage appeared to affect some voice calling for AT&T Mobility Voice over LTE consumers. AT&T's research indicates that only a small percentage of its Voice over LTE 911 calls were potentially impacted because AT&T's Voice over LTE devices generally retry 911 calls on its 3G network. AT&T Mobility attributed this outage to a hardware failure. According to AT&T, the two outages were unrelated. We are looking into the March 11th outage as well. Given the wide geographic scope of the outages and the critical importance of having a resilient 911 service, additional stakeholder input is necessary. To that end, the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau today issued a public notice that invites interested parties to submit information concerning the causes, effects, and implications of the March 8th and March 11th AT&T Mobility outages. In doing so, and in our continuing engagement with public safety and other state and local government officials, industry stakeholders, and consumers, the Bureau seeks to develop a more complete picture of the circumstances of each outage. Our overriding goal is not only to understand the circumstances that contributed to these outages and how they affected the public, but also to understand how the Commission, industry stakeholders, and public safety officials working together can contribute to preventing these types of outages in the future. I'd like to acknowledge the team leads on this investigation, John Healy, Associate Chief of the Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division within the Bureau, James Wiley, an attorney advisor within the division, and Megan Henry, a law clerk within the division. The ongoing investigation into these outages reflects the hard work of these and other members of my Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau team, and I greatly appreciate their tireless efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Folks. Do any of my colleagues have any comments?
I just want to quickly say, because it's such a moving, I understand why you're choked up, that as was affirmed for that very brilliant presentation, that 911 service is a vital part of our nation's emergency response and disaster preparedness system, you are right. Every time we are faced with dialing those three numbers, it is not. If assuming responsible persons dialing that number, it is not at a time of joy. It is usually in a time of crisis. So I commend Chairman Pai for acting swiftly when we learned about these outages. I have to commend the Bureau, of course, for always being alert. I have to commend the local communities, because we saw it firsthand in this region, and the media for disseminating the information, the backup, default information, if you allow me to say so, that was needed in order for persons to be more vigilant, as well as to know if something were to happen in the future, that they will have backup numbers that they encourage us to memorize or put on our devices or on our refrigerators. So again, I want to thank the Bureau, the team, for your diligent work on this matter. I feel safer by hearing you, and I feel more empowered by knowing that we've got literally a public safety cop on the beach that is watching out and looking out for our best interests, and that continues to inform consumers how best to protect themselves and their loved ones. Thank you.
Very well put, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly, any comments?
I just had a couple questions. I wanted to see when the chairman very aggressively followed up on this as soon as it occurred, and I just wanted to just check and see if I followed your slides correctly. Has there been full cooperation from the provider in question here? Have they been fully cooperative with the Bureau?
Yes.
Okay. How soon before we can identify some of the core causes of the two separate outages? What's your estimate of, is it a month? Is it 6 months? When should we get an idea of what occurred?
At this point, I can't give you a specific timeline, but I will tell you that the Bureau is acting expeditiously, but we're also going to be acting very thoroughly in investigating and getting to the bottom of this.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to join my colleagues in thanking the staff of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for acting with dispatch to open an investigation into these AT&T mobility outages that occurred earlier this month. It affected, as Commissioner Clyburn pointed out, 911 services across the country. On the evening of March 8th, the FCC sprang into action the second we found out about this outage. That very night, I was on the phone with AT&T's chief executive officer, and I stressed to him the importance of getting to the bottom of this outage and to resolving it. And I also publicly announced that we would be conducting a thorough investigation of this event, an investigation that, Chief, you have now aptly described. One of the fundamental priorities of the FCC is to protect the safety of life and property through the use of communications. And so this investigation is one of the many ways in which we fulfill that commitment to the American people. We have to ensure the resiliency and integrity of our nation's communications networks, especially when lives are at stake. And so I appreciate the Bureau's efforts to ensure that 911 is effective for and accessible to every American, including in these cases. So I look forward to studying your findings as they develop. Thank you to Lisa Folks, to Michael Caiafa, to Rochelle Cohen, Michael Conley, Jeff Goldthorpe, John Healy, Megan Henry, Nikki McGinnis, Jerry Stanshine, Julia Tu, and last but certainly not least, Mr. James Wiley, for your tireless efforts to secure and promote the safety of all Americans. With that, would any of my colleagues like to make any announcements of any kind at this time? I just have a few in our office, with your indulgence. First, we have some new arrivals in the office. Nathan Lemer, who I believe is here. I'd like to introduce him. He's our office's new policy advisor. Feel free to stand up so we can all scrutinize you. He joined our team just a couple of weeks ago. Before coming to the FCC, Nathan served as the outreach manager and a senior fellow at the R Street Institute, a D.C.-based think tank where he managed the Institute's government relations function and wrote extensively on emerging technology, innovation policy, and public safety. He also worked at Generation Opportunity, which is a millennial advocacy organization. Prior to these roles, he served as a legislative aide on Capitol Hill, as well as a legislative assistant in the Michigan House of Representatives. Now, while he received his undergraduate degree from Calvin College, he is a diehard Villanova Wildcat fan and was devastated by Nova's loss to the Badgers over the weekend. He also describes himself as a recovering hipster who, when not in the office, will most likely be found perusing a startup craft brewery, enjoying a pour-over coffee, and riding around D.C. on his fixed gear bike. Nathan, we appreciate your service and are very much in admiration of your fashion sense. Additionally, Carlos Minix, I don't know if he's here. There's Carlos, has joined our office as a staff assistant. Carlos comes to us from the Enforcement Bureau's Spectrum Division, and he's been with the FCC for a decade. He started when I did in OGC back in 2007. Carlos grew up in Prince George's County. He is studying criminal justice, and, most interesting to me at least, he's both a Washington Wizards and a Chicago Bulls fan. Now, we asked when they play, who does he root for, and he said Chicago, which is understandable since obviously MJ cut his teeth there more than in Washington. Carlos, thanks for what you're doing for our office. And next, I want to welcome back Max Staloff, as Max is here. He was an intern in our office last year, and apparently we didn't scare him or enough, but he enjoyed it, and then he decided to come back. He's a 3L at Georgetown. And in addition to doing terrific research and writing work for our office, he continues to be our advisor, I guess at least my advisor, on the best streaming video shows I should be watching. Thank you, Max, for your continued service to our office. Next, I wanted to make an announcement about Zenji Nakazawa, who is our Consumer Protection and Public Safety Advisor. He's already in our office, so he's not joining, and he's not leaving, but this is why I wanted to mention him. This evening, John Homan, the Baltimore County Fire Chief, will be presenting Zenji and his son, Christian, with the Baltimore County Fire Citizens Medal of Honor Award. And you might ask why this is. It is for, and I quote the county, for actions involving a sinking disabled vehicle on July 30th of 2016. Get a load of this. There's a place in Maryland called the Jones Falls, which, as I understand it, a 20-mile stream that runs from Lake Roland through Charm City and into the Inner Harbor. Now, while it's technically a stream, if you live in a valley that's on the edge of a watershed, as Zenji does, it's prone to morphing into a flash flood, just a raging river, and it's prone to inundating the flatlands surrounding it and carrying cars, cows, anything in its path away. Now, last summer, during some major rainstorms and flooding, Zenji and his son were driving along. They noticed that a car was stuck in the water. And from its positioning, they thought that there was no chance that somebody could be inside. But they took a closer look, and they realized there was actually a passenger. Without hesitation, which I find amazing, he and his son sprang into action. They got out of the car, jumped into the water. They managed to open the car door with, took some force, obviously, with the current, and they managed to get out the passenger. And so today, thanks to their efforts, the elderly woman who was in the car, one Mrs. Frances Davenport, is alive. Now, that is something. I mean, we all wonder what we would do in a situation like that. I think we'd like to think that we would do something. Zenji actually did it. And so I just want to say that I am proud of you as a fellow citizen and as somebody who leads this agency, to say that you are not only a public safety advisor, you are a public safety deliverer. Congratulations to you. If my colleagues don't have any further announcements, Madam Secretary, please announce the date of the next FCC agenda meeting.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, April 20th, 2017.
And with that, we stand adjourned. Hello. I'll just have a brief statement, and then we can get to Q&A. Today marks my 2-month anniversary as FCC chairman, and we had a pretty impressive array of items today to vote upon, and I think we delivered on each of them for the American people. I also feel like I got two anniversary gifts. I mean, first a Sweet 16 game in Kansas City involving the #1 Kansas Jayhawks, and as I pointed out earlier, Commissioner Clyburn's alma mater beat Duke, which I was very happy about. But anyway, focusing back on the matter at hand, the Commission marked this second month anniversary with a second consecutive open meeting that featured half a dozen items. And so after a fast start, the work of the Commission is showing no signs of slowing down. Today we took a number of steps to protect consumers and to advance public safety. Topping the agenda was a proposal to adopt new rules to combat the top source of complaints at the FCC, which is robocalls. And with today's action, we are aiming to give some relief to consumers who are sick and tired of receiving unwanted automated calls at the most inconvenient of times. And under these proposed rules, we would give providers greater leeway to block spoofed calls that purport to be from unassigned or invalid numbers. And this change would pave the way for a so-called do not originate list that would help stifle the efforts of illegitimate callers and scam artists. In addition to tackling the in-your-face issue of robocalls, the Commission also voted to tackle a matter that directly impacts public safety in a serious way. Contraband cell phones, as I pointed out, are being smuggled into prisons and jails across the country, and they are being used for illicit means that put at risk the guards, the inmates, and even the general populace around the nation. Today you got to hear Captain Johnson tell his compelling story, and I've heard many other stories like it firsthand. And I'm optimistic that the reforms that we adopted will help facilitate the use of radio-based technologies to detect and to block the use of contraband cell phones in correctional facilities. We're also seeking public input for further solutions to address this pressing problem, including disabling devices and geofencing. Additionally, we move to improve the quality of video relay service, or VRS, which is a vital real-time communications tool for deaf and hard-of-hearing individuals. Among many reforms, our vote today authorized a trial using specialized interpreters. And thus, for example, people can consult medical experts who are fluent in American Sign Language, or ASL. Now, zooming out, the bottom line on this is that the FCC is focused on delivering functionally equivalent communication services to all Americans with disabilities. And this, to me, is an important aspect of closing the digital divide, bringing into the digital era communities who historically in previous generations might have been neglected. In the spirit of time, I won't recap every single item that was on today's agenda. You were here, you heard it, but suffice it to say the FCC continues to get a lot done to promote the public interest in a still somewhat short time frame. And so I once again want to thank the fantastic Commission staff, some of whom are in the room, for their hard work that has helped us hit the ground running. We really appreciate it, the we not being a floor so much as the American people. With that...
All right, so shall we start over here?
Hi.
Brendan Carr, is that it?
Don't I look like a Brendan? Hi, I'm Kate Cox from Consumer Reports, and we are actually curious about the future of the robocall strike force.
Yeah, so the Strike Force gave us a framework for thinking about these issues, and we're taking some of the ideas that they gave us, and we're trying to create a framework that will allow the public sector and the private sector to work collaboratively to stop what Senator Hollings rightfully called the scourge of civilization. And so you saw some of the proposals that we talked about in terms of helping providers block calls that purport to be originating from spoofed numbers. And that's one of the many steps we're going to be taking in the time to come.
Is the strike force going to continue to meet, and are you going to continue to take action based on the recommendations?
Right now, we don't have any specific plans with respect to the strike force reconvening. They've given us a lot to chew on, and we have a terrific staff that is analyzing these issues in much detail, but I'm sure that we're going to be working collaboratively with them in one form or another in the future.
Hi. Ollie Breland with The Hill. My question is about your letter to Commerce Democrats that you sent earlier this week.
Yeah.
In the letter, you say that you disagree with the statement that the press is the enemy of the people. Mm-hmm. And then you draw the distinction between your comments and what the president said by saying that he was referring to fake news, which presumably was a reference to his CPAC speech, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So in the CPAC speech, he is a reference to his original tweet where he insults fake news and then outlines the New York Times, NBC, and CNN directly. Are you willing to disagree with him that these institutions are not fake news?
Well, look, I was very clear that several years ago I pointed out that I thought the news media performed an important job exercising that core First Amendment function of gathering news and the importance of distributing it to communities across this country and keeping people informed. I stand by those words. And what I said at the Senate hearing was simply that the larger debate about fake news, what is or what isn't, is a political debate that I'm not going to wade into. But those core values that I espoused years ago remain true in my mind.
But specifically on this, you break from the president in disagreeing that these institutions are fake news, correct?
Again, I'm not going to get into the whole debate about fake news.
So, I don't want to press you too far, but it seems very easy to say that the New York Times is not fake news.
Again, this is a political debate that is happening with political actors across the spectrum, and I've been very clear on the distinction that I think the media has discharges an important function under the First Amendment, and that's a value that I believe in.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Monty Taylor, Com Daily. Both Commissioner Clyburn and Commissioner O'Reilly mentioned something about a provision of the channel sharing order that involved must carry for low power stations and that it got dropped. I was just wondering if you could talk about what that was and why it was in the original document if it didn't work out.
For that, I would refer you to the staff. They'll be able to give you a little more flavor on what the thinking was there. But I'll simply say that, generally speaking, we were able to work very collaboratively with them on that item in particular, and so I'm grateful to them for their support.
Thank you.
Hey, Margaret McGill with Politico. President Trump has advocated eliminating 2 regulations for every new one. I understand that doesn't apply to independent agencies, but in a recent memo, the White House said, "We encourage independent regulatory agencies to identify existing regulations that, if repealed or revised, would achieve the cost savings that would fully offset the costs of new significant regulatory actions." So is this something that the FCC is going to do? What form would that take? What are your thoughts on conducting such a review?
So as you observed, the executive order technically does not apply to the FCC, but I will note that if you look at some of the actions simply at our open meetings, we have repealed and revised or mitigated some of the regulations that have been on the books, starting at the very first meeting that I had the privilege of leading as chairman when we repealed some outdated regulations regarding the maintenance of paper files and file cabinets that were gathering dust around the country, to today, where we took a look at the traffic international reports that were being compiled based on information submitted by industry and realized that the costs were outweighing the benefits and that they were no longer necessary to discharge the FCC's duties. So even if the executive order doesn't technically apply, I think the prism within which the FCC views any regulations that are on the books is, do they continue to be necessary in the public interest and to promote competition in 2017? And if they don't, then we obviously want to modernize them to make sure that they're not standing in the way of investment, of innovation, or otherwise imposing more costs than are warranted. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Chairman.
Nice
Amir
haircut.
Nasser, Morning Consult. Thank you. Earlier this month, in an exchange with Senate Commerce Committee Chairman John Thune, you said that if the FCC's broadband privacy rules were to be repealed, the FCC would still have the obligation to take care of or police consumers' privacy information, their privacy under Section 222. The Senate is voting on their CRA to use the CRA to reverse those rules right now. I'm curious has the agency, have you thought ahead if Title II were to go away, how would things move forward after the FTC AT&T case?
So there are a lot of ifs embedded in that question. Sorry, can you repeat again? If
you said that if these FCC rules were to go away, that you would still have the obligation to police privacy practices under Section 222.
Right.
That's through Title II. So if Title II were to go away, does the FCC just have no hand in the situation at all?
No, as I said at the Senate hearing, there continue to be Section 222 rules regarding CP&I that are still on the books. There are federal and state privacy regimes that still continue to apply, and so that was simply what I was observing at the Senate hearing, is that there continue to be rules that protect consumers.
But the agency hasn't thought ahead if on a post-Title II kind of world yet, that you're just only looking for the short term in that?
Well, no, we haven't currently strategized out anything like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on Ali's line of questioning. You just said that the debate over fake news isn't one you want to wade into, and I get that with regard to Facebook and Google and this swirl of kind of allegations. But the allegation Ali was referring to was the president saying that numerous companies you regulate, either through their affiliates or their parent companies, were using the public's airwaves, which you also regulate, to mislead Americans. So I guess I'm sort of wondering, how is this not within your portfolio or ambit?
I've been pretty clear about the value I place on the importance of First Amendment freedoms, and so long as I'm serving at the FCC and duty-bound to implement both the Constitution and the laws of the United States, that's how I'll conduct my job.
Right, and I'm not disputing that you support a free press, but I'm trying to understand why it is that you feel like it's not your place to weigh in on whether broadcast outlets are disseminating false information to the American people.
Well, look, again, that's a political debate that many people in the public arena have debated back and forth, and my job is not to be a political actor. It's simply to be somebody at the FCC who is, as I said, administering the laws of the United States. And so I'm simply not going to wade into that kind of political debate. I'm going to be focused on the core values of the First Amendment and protecting them.
If consumers, in your role as someone administering the regulations and laws of the United States, if someone brought some sort of complaint that false information was being disseminated over these outlets, would you pursue it?
A complaint to the FCC?
Yeah.
Again, I haven't seen any such complaints, so I'm not going to hypothesize about what we might do if and when we saw it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Hi, Jenna Ebersole from Law 360. Hi. Returning to privacy, you said with the FTC chair, you could see the FCC developing a framework that aligns more closely with the FTC's. Given the Congress is voting to strip the rules, do you think the FCC still has the ability at that point to set up a new framework that would conform with the FTC's?
Well, look, obviously the vote is ongoing, so we don't know what the outcome is going to be. But I think the end goal that I have, that Chairwoman Olhausen has, that everybody, I think of on this issue has, is that we want to recognize and to vindicate consumers' uniform expectation of privacy, that when an American goes online, he or she wants to make sure that his or her sensitive information is protected, regardless of the regulatory classification of the entity that is holding that information. And I think that is something that is a core consumer protection value. And we, regardless of what the vote might be or other factors, we want to make sure that uniform expectation is something that regulation takes into account seriously.
So you think the FCC would still have a role there or be able to set new rules if Congress does this?
Again, it would depend on the interpretation of the Congressional Review Act and other legal and regulatory provisions, but we haven't yet had a chance to study what those might be.
Sure.
Kyle Daly, Bloomberg BNA. Just wanted to stick with privacy. So,
sure.
I know in your correspondence with some members of the Senate, you've suggested, and I think you just said now on the dais, Section 222, make sure that there's going to be some sort of protection, but, at the same time, in your dissent from the Open Internet Order, you warned against using Section 222, applying it to broadband. You also opposed the original NPRM, where they were considering using CP&I as sort of the framework for privacy. So how do you kind of square that when historically you've said that 222 really shouldn't apply to broadband?
Well, the point I was making in that dissent and in the privacy rulemaking, if you look at it, was that the agency was refusing to make sure that to the maximum extent possible its privacy regulations matched what the FTC was doing. That was something that my predecessor explicitly stated. He recognized the uniform expectation that consumers had, and he publicly admitted to making sure that our regulations were, to the extent possible, coterminous with what the FTC did. But if you look at the final result, the FCC's privacy regulations singled out for significantly more onerous treatment certain segments of the communications industry. And so the point I was simply making was, look, we have a uniform expectation of privacy. It seems reasonable, therefore, in any context, but especially this one, for there to be a level playing field in terms of regulation. And that was sort of the impetus for a lot of the arguments I made.
And just to be clear, let's say, whether it's an act of Congress or you guys or whatever happens, Title II goes away for broadband. Does privacy just go back to the FTC in your view?
Again, that's a hypothetical, double hypothetical, I guess, that I'm not going to wade into.
More on privacy. They just actually in the Senate just now approved the CRA.
Okay.
So if it goes to the House and to the President, how would you ensure that the interpretation of Section 222 is the same as what the FTC is doing if you don't do new rules? I mean, obviously, if they're substantially different, you can do new rules. So would you do new rules? Or if you don't do new rules, how do you make sure that enforcement is the same as the FTC?
Yeah, I mean, we'll study the appropriate way forward, but I think it simply underscores the point I was making last year when these rules were being debated and the year before, was that, look, the FCC should have made sure that its regulatory approach matched the FTC's framework. And to the extent that they were dissimilar and created an asymmetry in terms of regulation of companies that were in the same space, online advertising space, then that kind of disjunction is something that doesn't ultimately serve consumers well. And so we'll study what the appropriate way forward is, but I can tell you that my own core goal is to make sure that that uniform expectation of privacy that I've mentioned a couple times is vindicated through the use of a regulatory framework that establishes a level playing field. Yeah, we'll study the appropriate way forward.
You have rules that are current 222 rules really don't make any sense for broadband providers. They're written for telephone companies. So if you don't do new rules, what other way forward is there then?
That's one of the things we will study, and if and when the vote is passed, or the bill is enacted.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Todd Shields, Bloomberg News. Can you describe your opinion of the current FCC media ownership rules, including JSAs and the UHF discount, and when will you move to alter those, if you move at all? Thank you.
I'll tackle the second one first. I can't give you any specific time frame. We're still in the process of reviewing the appropriate way forward. But as to the former question, look, you can look at some of my statements over the years in terms of media ownership, and the basic principle I've enunciated is pretty simple, that our regulations should match the realities of the modern marketplace. And, as I've said before, the FCC has blessed multi-billion-dollar mergers of major MVPDs. Just last year, we okayed the combination of the second, the third, and the sixth largest cable providers, but somehow when it comes to a combination of a newspaper and a radio station in Ottumwa, Iowa, we simply get the vapors. And so the point I've simply made is to make sure that our regulations match the modern marketplace. And newspaper radio is one I've identified in particular, including, I believe, at the Senate oversight hearing recently, in which there's literally no evidence in the record to support that cross-ownership restriction. I've also talked about the importance of joint sales agreements in marketplaces. I've used a number of different examples. You can look at my statement back in, I think it was 2014, where I identified very carefully a lot of the anecdotes that supported the proposition that JSAs were important, as well as the aggregate evidence that stations that are part of a JSA actually collected and distributed more news to local communities. And so there, too, I think that there are synergies that are possible that our rules need to make sure we don't prohibit preemptively.
So in sum, your opinion would be the rules do not match the realities of the marketplace today?
I think in many cases the record reflects that there is no evidence to justify some of these rules. No? Okay.
I think that is it. All right, thank you very much.
All right, guys, have a good month. See you.
Okay, we can start with the Bureau press conferences now. Are there any questions on the robocall item? Okay, Lynn has one, so if the CGB team could come up. Lynn?
This standard for calls being highly likely to be illegal, is that like a new standard that you're proposing, or is that something that already exists in statute or other FCC rules?
That's something that we're seeking comment on here, so it would be a new standard that we'd be eventually adopting.
Thank you. That was all I had.
Any others on this? Okay. Okay, the next on the agenda was the contraband cell phones. Any questions on that item? Todd? Okay.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. From what I'm trying to figure out what exactly changes with this order, and I know it's probably a lot of things, but maybe I can state my point of confusion. Might be a way into the conversation. There are these systems, CIS systems, that can identify, and then somebody blocks the phone call once this fancy system identifies it. Who does the blocking? The CIS separate from the phone companies, or does it request that the phone companies block?
Depending on the CIS system it's being used, the system itself actually could block that particular, or could isolate that particular call and prevent it to go forward.
Okay. And the phone companies have made a point in filings of saying it should take a court order. So have these systems been operating already unchallenged, or blocking phone calls in some places, or are they not anywhere now?
What we are doing actually, we are in the report and order, we are allowing those airways to be able to use by CIS operators through a leasing or some kind of arrangements with the wireless service providers in those areas. So the report and order will facilitate for them to enter into agreements so that the CIS operators actually have right to use their devices to identify and intercept the particular calls within the correctional facilities. And we are talking about calls that are originated from unauthorized, illegal cell phones within the correctional facilities. Do you have anything to add?
Well, have there been problems with this elsewhere? Have there been companies that don't allow the CIS operators on their spectrum? Or do state officials, for instance, say this has been a problem? Or what problem are we addressing with this change?
I think what we were saying was the systems are out there today that Nisha just described. What we're doing here is making it quicker and easier for the CIS providers to get the FCC authority they need for their lease arrangements, so that we can very quickly go from them requesting it to us authorizing it, and the FCC's out of the way.
And then they're in place out in the field without a delay of many months. Is that right? And so the carrier requirement is please cooperate with the CIS guys, and there's a certain time schedule you set up, if I have it right.
Right.
Okay.
Great. Any others?
As I understand it, the draft order had a provision that would have required the CMRS licensees to notify the CIS operators at least 90 days before adding new frequency bands or an air interface technology, and parties had asked for that to be deferred. Is that still in the order, or has that been moved to the FNPRM?
I think as you heard some of the commissioners talking about it at the meeting today, that's something we're asking questions about now rather than moving directly to an action on it.
Okay, thank you.
Any others on this? Maybe wireless, is it the same team handling cellular service? Maybe we should just go to that one.
Right. Do you have any questions on cellular service?
Or if there are any questions on cellular service. Okay. All right. So and then VRS. Any questions on VRS reform? Okay. International reporting. Okay. And then channel sharing. Okay. Monty.
Hi, Monty from Communications Daily. As I asked the chairman a little bit ago, I was curious about the must-carry thing that was brought up by Commissioner Clyburn and Commissioner O'Reilly. They mentioned a provision that had been in the draft that was dropped, and I was wondering what the reasoning was behind the original language and what exactly it was and what it looks like now.
In the circulated draft, the LPTV providers that wanted to channel share could qualify for must-carry at the channel sharing location. There were some concerns raised in the record and by the eighth floor that perhaps that cut might increase the carriage burdens on MVPDs. And so as a consequence, the item as described this afternoon explains that only if an LPTV station had must-carry originally at its existing location could it then take the must-carry to the shared location, but of course it still must qualify under the statute for must-carry even in that situation.
So when they were in the original language, how could they qualify? Would it be just because they were being shared with a must-carry station?
So they'd be sharing with a must-carry station, and then the factors would still apply, but the concern was that if one LPTV station at that location already had carriage, then presumably the second LPTV station would be likely to qualify as well.
I think that's all I have.
Okay.
Any others on channel sharing? Okay, thank you. And finally, public safety. Any questions on the AT&T outage? Margaret?
Hi, Margaret McGill with Politico. I just have a quick question. Is it normal or is it somewhat new to be seeking comment from the public on an investigation into an outage? I'm just not sure if that's the normal course of things or if that's something unique given the circumstances here.
No, it's not unique. We've actually done that previously back in 2012 when we did an investigation into the impact of the derecho storm. We issued a public notice seeking comment. We also did the same thing when we, a couple of years ago, were investigating the bunch of 911 outages that impacted 6 states across the country.
And can you tell me the purpose of seeking comment is just to get feedback on the different effects?
It's to try to get as much information about the impact and effects as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot. Okay, that will conclude the press conference. Thank you.